life cycles with fungi and being introduced to them for general life cycles. We're now going to specifically learn some for mosses and ferns, so seedless plants. You remember, this is our phylogeny for plants. We are going to ignore most of these groups, but we are going to look at mosses and pterophytes, which are ferns, and then gymnosperms and angiosperms are the seeded plants. Mosses then are our bryophytes, which are non-vascular, meaning they don't have xylem and phloem. Ferns are our first vascular plants, which are the pterophytes. Okay, and we don't have it actually on here, but this is the ferns, and the allies are, the ferns would be the pterophytes. Alright, so we'll start with moss. Moss have a unique ability in their colonization. So here's a wet forest, wet rainforest, where you have lots of mosses all over the trees and on the ground, and they have an ability to go into a dormant stage when things are dry, and then when conditions are wet and moist, they will be able to come out of dormancy and produce spores and basically cover any areas that are moist. They are also one of the only organisms that can colonize areas that don't have any soil, so they can colonize bare rock, and you'll find them on cement and on rocks all the time. An example of a moss is sphagnum, which is peat moss. Okay, this is basically a bunch of dead moss which has not been able to decay because it was saturated by water, and it can be harvested and dried out. That's what these people are doing here, and used as fuel. And up to 30% of the world's soil carbon is in these sphagnum moss beds. So this is they have these beds in Ireland and England. All right, so this is the moss life cycle, and we'll go over this in class, but the steps in words look like this. So you have gametophytes, which are haploid, and that is the dominant stage of the life cycle. The sporophytes, which are diploid, are only present for part of the life cycle. Spores are haploid. Once they germinate, find favorable conditions, they will grow into protonemata, which are very basically the beginnings of their gametophytes. These grow buds and then form male or female gametophytes. The male gametophyte develops antheridia, which are the structures that develop sperm. And then the female gametophyte develops archegonia, which houses the eggs. When fertilization occurs, because when sperm through the medium of water enter into the archegonia where the eggs are, they will form a zygote, which stays in the archegonium, and then the zygote develops into a sporophyte, and before that it is an embryo which is dependent on the gametophyte for nutrients. The sporophyte stays embedded within the gametophyte for its whole functional part of the life cycle, and it is embedded into the archegonium by a structure called the foot. The setae transfers nutrients to the top part, which is the sporangium, or also called the capsule, and this holds the spores, and the spores develop by meiosis. So then you have the haploid spores, which then disperse through the peristome, which opens and closes when conditions are favorable. So some questions which we'll answer in class. Why are mosses usually only found in moist habitats? Is the diploid stage ever independent of the haploid stage in mosses? So you can look at the life cycle and answer these. And then why are mosses not very large compared to vascular plants? All right, ferns have our vasculature. Xylem is for conducting water and phloem for nutrients, especially sugar. They have roots and leaves, which the mosses did not. They also have sporophylls, which are the structures which hold the leaves. They bear sporangia, so they don't have a capsule, but they do have sporangia, which hold the spores. Typically, ferns have one type of spore, so those are homosporous, but some ferns have two types, which are heterosporous. The megaspores develop into the female gametophytes, and the microspores develop into the male gametophytes. Okay, so this is what the fern life cycle looks like. And some differences are the sporophyte is the dominant, the diploid stage is the dominant stage, which is more similar to seed plants. And the sporophyte develops structures called sori, or a sorus, which has a cluster of sporangia. And the sporangia produce the haploid spores through meiosis. Those spores then disperse and germinate when they find favorable conditions into gametophytes that produce antheridium and archegonium. Again, like the mosses, the antheridium produces sperm, archegonium produces eggs that hold the eggs. The sperm have flagella and they can swim into the archegonium. It requires water in order to do that. After fertilization takes place, you have a zygote, which forms in the archegonium, and then the zygote develops into a new sporophyte. Eventually, the sporophyte no longer needs the archegonium because it has roots and its own leaves for photosynthesis. So it's not dependent on the gametophyte like the moss is. So some of the questions about ferns: was the sporophyte ever independent from the gametophyte? Was the example that we gave homosporous or heterosporous? And what is the structure the spores originate from? There's the fern life cycle, and then going back to the moss life cycle. All right, that's it.